The crystal wine glass shattered against the marble floor. The sharp sound silenced the entire restaurant. More than 100 guests turned toward table 7, where one of the richest men in the country sat glaring at a waiter who hadn't moved an inch. "You call this five-star service?" the billionaire snapped. Daniel Carter looked calmly at the broken glass. "I'm sorry, sir. I'll clean that immediately." The man leaned back in his chair with a smug smile. "You'd better. It's probably the most expensive thing you'll ever touch." A few nervous laughs came from the billionaire's dinner guests. Daniel simply nodded. He picked up a broom and dustpan, carefully swept every piece of glass from the floor. Then he replaced the glass with a new one. Not once did he argue. Not once did he roll his eyes. He had learned years ago that some battles weren't worth fighting. "My name is Daniel Carter. I was 38 years old, a single father, a mechanic during the day, a waiter at one of the city's finest restaurants at night. Most people assumed I worked 2 jobs because I was desperate. The truth was more complicated. 3 years earlier, my wife, Sarah, lost her battle with cancer. Before she passed away, she squeezed my hand and whispered something I promised I would never forget. No matter what happens, make sure Lily always feels safe." Those words became the foundation of my life. Every extra shift, every sleepless night, every sore muscle, every sacrifice. It was all for my daughter. Lily was 7 years old, bright, curious, and somehow always smiling despite everything we'd been through. She never complained when I missed bedtime because of work. Instead, she left little drawings on the refrigerator, pictures of the 2 of us holding hands, little hearts, messages that simply read, "I love you, Daddy." Whenever exhaustion made me question whether I could keep going, I looked at those drawings. Then I kept going. During the day, I repaired engines at a small neighborhood garage. The owner, Frank Wilson, had known me for almost 15 years. When Sarah became sick, Frank reduced my hours without cutting my pay so I could spend more time at the hospital. "I'll figure out the business," he'd said. "You take care of your family." I never forgot that kindness. At night, after picking Lily up from my sister Emily's house, helping with homework, making dinner, and putting her to bed, I changed into a crisp white shirt and black vest before driving to the Grand Monarch restaurant. The tips paid for school supplies, medical debt, savings for Lily's future. Some people found it embarrassing that a certified master mechanic waited tables. I never did. Honest work is honest work. The evening everything changed began like any other. The restaurant buzzed with conversation. Soft piano music drifted through the dining room. Crystal chandeliers reflected warm golden light across polished marble floors. The hostess suddenly hurried toward the manager. "Mr. Blackwell just arrived." Every employee immediately understood. Richard Blackwell, founder and chairman of Blackwell Holdings, a billionaire whose companies employed thousands. He was famous for building billion-dollar businesses. He was equally famous for humiliating employees who failed to meet his expectations. Servers quietly exchanged worried glances. One whispered, "I hope he isn't seated in my section." The manager looked around. His eyes stopped on me. "Daniel, I'm sorry. Table 7 is yours tonight." I smiled. "No problem." He lowered his voice. "Don't take anything personally." "I won't." A few moments later, Richard entered surrounded by executives, lawyers, and investors. He never looked around the restaurant. He expected the room to notice him. And it did. As I approached the table, I smiled politely. "Good evening. My name is Daniel. I'll be taking care of you tonight." Richard barely looked up from his phone. "Sparkling water. No lemon. And make it quick." "Of course, sir." The evening continued without incident for nearly 30 minutes. Every order was prepared exactly as requested. Every drink arrived on time. Every plate met the restaurant's highest standards. Then one of Richard's business partners asked for another bottle of wine. As I carefully poured it, someone bumped Richard's chair from behind. His elbow struck the stem of his wine glass. The glass tipped over. Red wine spread across the white tablecloth before the crystal crashed onto the floor. Richard immediately stood. "This is unbelievable." The entire restaurant fell silent. He pointed directly at me. "What kind of incompetent service is this?" I knew exactly what had happened. He had knocked over the glass himself. Several nearby guests knew it too. But no one spoke. The easiest target was the waiter. I bowed my head slightly. "I'm very sorry for the inconvenience. I'll replace everything immediately." Richard laughed loudly enough for half the restaurant to hear. "Inconvenience. You've probably ruined a bottle worth more than your monthly paycheck. His guest chuckled. Someone quietly recorded the scene on a phone. I cleaned the table without saying a word. Then I returned with fresh wine, fresh glasses, fresh linens. Everything looked perfect again. I hoped the evening would finally calm down. Instead, Richard smiled the way some people smile just before creating another problem. And I had no idea his next insult would become the moment that changed both of our lives forever. The restaurant remained silent after my words. Try mocking me again, but this time without hiding behind your wallet. For several long seconds, Richard Blackwell simply stared at me. No one moved. No one spoke. His business partners looked horrified. Several guests stopped eating altogether. The restaurant manager looked ready to intervene. Instead, something completely unexpected happened. Richard slowly sat back down. He looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen before. Not anger. Curiosity. He motioned toward the empty chair across from him. Sit. I shook my head politely. I'm working. He nodded once. Fair enough. Then, in a calm voice completely different from the one he'd been using all evening, he asked, What's your name? Daniel Carter. How long have you worked here? 3 years. And before that, I've been a mechanic for nearly 20 years. His eyebrows lifted slightly. A mechanic? Yes. So why are you serving tables? I answered honestly. My daughter deserves opportunities that I can't afford with one job. Richard became quiet. For the first time that evening, he looked less like a billionaire and more like an ordinary man trying to understand someone else's life. He paid the bill in full, left a generous tip for the restaurant staff, then stood. Before leaving, he looked directly at me. I owe you an apology. I nodded politely. Good night, sir. The following morning, I was changing the oil in an old pickup truck when 3 black luxury sedans stopped outside my garage. Frank looked through the window. Daniel, I think someone's looking for you. Richard Blackwell stepped out alone. No reporters. No assistants. No photographers. Just him. He walked across the garage floor until he stood beside my workbench. I hope I'm not interrupting. I smiled. Just working. He looked around at the modest shop. Old tool cabinets. Concrete floors. Engines waiting to be repaired. Nothing glamorous. Everything honest. I've never been inside a place like this. I laughed softly. Everyone should visit one at least once. Richard smiled for the first time. I've been thinking about what happened last night. So have I. I embarrassed myself. I didn't answer. There was a time, Richard continued, when I wasn't like that. What changed? He sighed deeply. Success. I convinced myself fear was the same thing as respect. Frank quietly returned to the office, giving us privacy. Richard looked at me. Would you have coffee with me? I still have customers. I'll wait. That afternoon, after the garage closed for lunch, we sat at a small diner across the street. No luxury restaurant. No expensive suits. Just 2 men drinking ordinary coffee. Richard listened as I spoke about Sarah. How cancer had slowly taken her strength. How Lily had climbed into the hospital bed every afternoon after school. How Sarah's final words had changed my life forever. Richard didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he stared quietly into his coffee. My father worked 3 jobs. He died before I became successful. I promised myself I'd never struggle the way he did. He smiled sadly. Somewhere along the way, I forgot what struggle actually looked like. A week later, Richard surprised me again. He called the garage. I need a favor. I'm listening. Our company is hosting a leadership conference. 500 executives. I want you to speak. I laughed. You've got the wrong person. No. I finally found the right one. I don't know anything about corporate leadership. Richard smiled. You know everything. You simply call it being a father. After several days, I reluctantly agreed. Standing backstage felt more intimidating than any difficult customer I'd ever faced. Richard introduced me personally. I'd like you to meet someone who taught me more in 5 minutes than most consultants teach in 5 years. The audience applauded politely. I walked onto the stage wearing the same simple suit I'd worn to church for years. No expensive watch. No impressive title. Just an ordinary father. I looked across hundreds of executives. Then began. I repair engines. I wait tables. And every night before leaving for work, I kiss my daughter goodnight. The audience became completely silent. I've learned something from both jobs. Machines break when small problems are ignored. So do people. I told them about respect. About patience. About serving others. about never measuring someone's worth by their paycheck. When I finished, no one applauded immediately. For several seconds, the room remained completely still. Then one executive stood. Another followed. Within moments, every person inside the convention hall was on their feet. Richard wiped away tears he hadn't expected. 3 months later, Blackwell Holdings announced sweeping changes. Mandatory leadership training, respect and dignity standards for every manager, scholarship funds for employees' children, emergency assistance for single parents facing hardship. Executives were now evaluated not only by profits, but also by employee satisfaction and retention. Reporters immediately asked Richard why he had transformed company policy. His answer appeared in newspapers across the country. A waiter reminded me that the most valuable people in any company are often the ones we notice the least. Years passed. Lily grew into a confident young woman. She earned one of the first scholarships Richard created. On the day she graduated from college, Richard quietly sat beside me in the audience. After the ceremony, Lily hugged both of us. She smiled at Richard. "Thank you." He shook his head gently. "No, thank your father." He reminded me that wealth isn't measured by what you own. It's measured by who you become. As we walked across the campus together, I remembered that painful evening in the restaurant. The broken glass, the insults, the laughter. At the time, it had felt like one of the worst nights of my life. Instead, it became the beginning of something neither of us could have imagined. Richard didn't become a better man because someone humiliated him. He became better because someone refused to surrender his dignity. And I didn't win because I embarrassed a billionaire. I won because I remembered something my late wife had once whispered to me. Never let someone else's arrogance convince you that your kindness is weakness. She had been right. Kindness is never weakness. Respect is never something money can buy. And sometimes the strongest voice in the room belongs not to the richest person at the table, but to the quiet single father who knows exactly who he is and refuses to let anyone else decide his worth.